Hey, Peter.
Hey, don't know that the meetup is set up right with the meetup link.
I mean, I got in it, so.
You are an employee of Upstate Interactive with access to my calendar. You've got an inside view. As for the rest of the world, I just sent the Syracuse JavaScript meetup channel a link that might trigger 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I sent meetup.com the link as well. That might trigger 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 as well. So let's just say until about 6:10, we'll see what happens with this. Did you end up getting what you wanted out of the test?
I want to say an optimistic yes, but I want to change most of the errors from the expense form edit. So I want to work on that first before giving a definitive yes.
We only worked on expense form new. Did that seem to go away?
I think so. I actually believe so. Yeah.
Right on. That's pretty good stuff. Just to contact attendees. Let's see, contact attendees, membership, subject, Zoom link. Zoom link for tonight's meetup. Sometimes those things start out. Does it write on my calendar? Yeah, that's all right. That's pretty good. All right. Looks like we got Caleb on. Looks like we got, while his name is listed there as Ahmed, he goes by Ozzy. Good to see you, Ozzy.
Hey, how are you doing? Can you see me?
Yep, I can see 3/4 of you anyhow. Your chin's a little out of frame. There we go. That's all right. And Caleb, if you can hear, just indicate in any way that you can, just so we know we got you here.
I can hear you, Peter.
Right on.
I'm still in the middle of cooking dinner, so I may not be. I'm going to be passively interacting.
No sweat. I've got a quick DM in my meetups from Liza K. So we'll give her a minute to get in. And as I was sharing with Vivian here that I didn't actually publicly post the meetup link. So that's a technical thing that would, of course, limit attendance. And I've done everything that I can. So Caleb, I guess you saw it in the, what do we call that?
Yeah, I saw it in Slack. I was about to message you.
And you couldn't see it prior to that. Is that accurate? You just couldn't see any link?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. I'll have to try to update that for later. Liza, good to see you. If you've got the audio, you can just somehow confirm that you can hear.
Sorry, I just joined.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Liza, where are you calling in from?
From LA?
Los Angeles. That makes 2 of you here. We've got Vivian in from Los Angeles as well.
Oh, sorry. Awesome. That's pretty cool.
It's alarmingly warm, isn't it?
In winter, yeah. We still have ducks in the pond. I don't know what's going on.
Indeed.
Liza, what's your background in JavaScript?
I was interning with a React, with a travel company that was working with React Native. So, and I've done some Vue in the past.
Done some Vue in the past. Anybody else here done Vue in the past? Vue is a core topic tonight. Liza, how'd you find out about the event here?
I usually look for specific topics. Right now I'm practicing like algorithms and data structures mostly, but I run into different JavaScript groups that I sign up for, you know, as I get to find them.
Very good. Very good. And it looks like we've got Jason Scharf calling in now. Jason, hi.
Hey, what's up, Peter? Sorry I'm late, man. How you doing today?
I'm happy. Happy to see you as ever.
Good, man. Good, dude.
We've got some Vue experience here with Liza having done some in the past. What's your experience with Vue?
You're asking me?
Yep.
Just a little bit. Just the last few weeks, I've been just playing around with a Vue project for an interview. So that's it. Just the last few weeks.
All right. So
Also, I actually haven't touched it in the last year or year and a half, so I might have to be refreshed. So yeah.
yep, we can do that. I think that's going to be part of it for me as well. I did Vue, probably Vue 2 was the last time I took a serious look at it, and Vue 3 was being discussed, and people were getting a little thoughtful on the differences and whether they mattered. Looks like we have Joshua in. Hello, Joshua. And Joshua, if you could indicate in any way that you can hear or
Hello.
hello.
I'm just cooking my dinner and my wife is on the phone next to me.
Nice to see you, Joshua. Now, just so everybody can be aware, there's a connection here. Joshua is currently doing a little side work for Upstate Interactive, and I am a partner at Upstate Interactive. And on the call, Vivian from Los Angeles is working from Los Angeles for Upstate Interactive. So Joshua and Vivian, you have a little connection there that maybe you aren't aware of. Okay. For everyone else, Caleb and Jason and Joshua and Ozzy and I are all basically Syracusans, or close to it anyway, enough to call ourselves that. So we are 5 folks that may have seen each other in person in the past, and with Vivian coming in from LA and Liza coming in from LA, we've got a little national representation that we might not have otherwise. So some good things coming out of this virtual stuff. Today, our topics are Vue.js and RxJS. The way this is going to go is the idea of first, let's talk about Vue.js, where it lives in the world. Just anything that we all know as a part of the background, we can share about that. And then in the next part, we'll collaboratively work on a Vue app. I'll share my screen. I'll go through with the screen shared up with the idea that I haven't touched Vue in over a year. And Jason, you might have some certain things to say to guide along. The written public documentation might have some things to guide along. Anyone else who's on may be able to access the documentation faster than I might be able to, given I'll be writing. So we'll get there. And then RxJS, I'll give more of an overview of an application that uses RxJS. I use that day to day. And I guess there's some cool things that we can talk about with that to give anybody a perspective on that more specifically. We're scheduled for an hour. We're starting about 10 minutes after the hour, so we'll go as long as 10 minutes after the hour, and we'll just give it like that. So, Vue.js. Vue.js in some ways is thought about as one of the 3 established modern JavaScript ways of writing client-side single-page applications. Other folks talk about React, and I usually am talking about Angular. This is not either of those. It does relate in certain ways. Vue.js is a very incremental approach. You can adapt just to the Vue layer, and that's very much like React. It also has HTML template-based Vue rendering, and that's very much like Angular. As all of those 3, Angular and React and Vue, are built with reactivity in the sort of the core of the way they work. It does it in a different way than Angular does, which is RxJS. And it does it in a different way than React as well, because it has a separation between JavaScript and the other. I am going to mute absolutely everybody, but I'm not going to turn off the ability to speak. So just stay muted by default. And if you have something to add, you can always add it at any time. All right. So those are the comparisons that are made around Vue.js and Angular and React and so on. Why does anybody use Vue? First, it's well invested in. Angular is usually known to be invested in by Google. Facebook is usually known to be well investing in React. And then Vue, I believe, is Alibaba is the main invested party in it. Vue is used across the world for a number of different scenarios, but a lot of folks seem to like that its incremental approach allows for a little bit more flexibility than Angular has, while adding a little bit more structure than React. It's the Goldilocks of the 3. And that is about what I can say about Vue.js from where it fits in the perspective of the broader world. So I'll ask Jason, with your most recent stuff on Vue, The company that you're applying to is asking you about Vue. Is that it, right?
Yeah, just to work on a single page application for a Vue project because they use it sometimes for their work.
And are they asking you that you are able to work with Vue from the perspective that you would be using it incrementally? Would you be basically using Vue with Vue Router and Vuex and the entire Vue ecosystem?
Yeah, he wanted us to use, Vuetify for some of the layout and yeah, Router to help with the pages. He didn't mention the Vue, whatever you mentioned, the Vue UX. But yeah, so no, yeah, the routing and the Vuetify. Yeah.
Very cool. So they're kind of getting you into the idea that you're going to use some of the ecosystem, and then who knows what you'll do for state management.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And let's see here. I think that Liza gave an idea that she had a long time ago had used Vue. Has anybody more recently looked at Vue or have any comments on it outside Liza and Jason? And Liza, do feel welcome to, participate.
Yeah, I actually recently used it. I had to learn it because the platform we were using at work implemented their views in Vue. So we had to quickly get up to speed on that. I don't have much experience on the Angular side, but I'm more a React person. And based on those experiences, I would say that Vue probably leans more into Angular's philosophy on most things, specifically on like the two-way binding and stuff like that. Whereas React is one-way data flow and all of that.
So Angular offers two-way binding using ng model, and in practice, nobody uses it that I've ever met at a large scale deployment. They basically use what's called the reactive style, and it's very much a one-way cycle.
I didn't know that.
It can be accomplished in a number of different ways. Probably the best place where you see it is in the forms. So how does forms work in React when you want to update like the value of an input based on data from a server?
Yeah, it's considered, I guess, would be either you might see MVVM is how some people approach it, or the MVU, which is model view update, which is different from MVC, where your M and C are connected and your V and M are connected. It's more of a cycle. So your controller or your updates the model updates the view updates sends commands to the updater. So it's a one-way data flow.
And you're describing that as React, yeah?
Yeah, React doesn't support, it's only the view part of it. So it promotes using that sort of architecture.
And with Vue, when it's two-way data binding, what is that more like, MVVM?
Yeah, it's like you were saying, like the ng model, it uses that sort of stuff where it's called B model in Vue. I'm pretty new to it as well. So there may be a way to do one-way binding or single data flow for Vue as well, but I'm not too familiar. Okay. Certainly when you start learning it, it promotes the two-way binding.
The Vuex is that ecosystem package. It's a state management, and it's a little bit closer to one-way data flows. It's not quite Redux. It does things in a little different way. It does, in the other sense, promote the idea that there are events and commands that dispatch actions that then ultimately change some sort of store, and then that store does the whole cycle like you might with Redux, like you might with NGRX. Vivian, any thoughts on Vue?
Nope.
Ozzy, any thoughts on Vue? See, is Ozzy recognizing that he's muted?
There you go. Sorry about that. It was on mute. Yeah. What other language? I'm sorry. What other language besides the one Caleb mentioned before do you need to start with Vue?
Vue, like Angular, is basically HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Where the difference between the both of them and React is React promotes no HTML and practically do it all in JavaScript, and they use something called JSX in order to get around eventually to something that's a little bit like HTML. So what Vue does, and it does this maybe a little bit better than Angular, is very strictly build on top of HTML. So when it does things like V model and so on, There's a little syntactical sugar in there, and there's other ways to write it without. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript for Vue.
Here I have a question. On Vue, they have the what's it called? I'm trying to remember. Oh, I entirely forgot my question. I'm sorry. I might get back to it at some point.
I'm going to share my screen. We'll go over the Vue docs for a moment before getting into the code. All right. So if we go to Vue.js, we can see vuejs.org. Why Vue.js is not something we're going to get into. We will for a moment touch on what they call their core libraries, and we'll start with Vuex because that seems to be one that mattered to folks. So what is a state management pattern? We look at this, we see that there is some data state, a single object, and there is some value called count, and that count gets incremented by dispatched method. Important here to see that there is a object keyed called methods, which the increment method exists on. All right, and then when we go to it, we basically see what Caleb had mentioned in terms of a one-way flow, some actions dispatched to change the state, the changes go to the view, and then a user can interact with the view to dispatch some actions, and around it goes. It breaks down if we have multiple components that share a common state. So now we get Vuex involved, which has some prescribed ways of managing updates to state. And you can see two key things that are added, three really. There's this backend API piece, there's this DevTools piece, and now there's this mutations thing. So let's just talk about this in concept. We have some Vue components. We're basically saying that they have the appearance of being UI, UX. This is what anybody might see if they're dealing with this application. Let's say that there's an input there. And let's say that that input is to put in your first name on a payment form. Okay, let's say that the next input goes and it's your last name on a payment form. Okay, now let's say that you get your credit card number and you start typing in your digits. If your form is as modern as some are, by the time you've typed in your 4 leading digits, it can determine whether you have a Visa or a MasterCard or so on and so on. So how does it do that? It sends a quick little API call based on those 4 digits, and then it returns what type of card that is based on that API's response. So let's say that we're now on the payment form, we've put in our first name and our last name, and now we're doing our payment information. So an action dispatches every time that we type out a number, as long as there's a minimum length of 4. So we've typed out our 4 digits, 4117. Now we dispatch that action as a result of that that says, check the backend API, what type of card was that? And the backend API tells us it was a Visa. So we dispatch another action that commits mutations to the state. So the mutations function is going to say, here are, based on those updates, the ways that the root state of data needs to change in order to reflect what the actions coming in are asking to change. And then that goes to that root state object. And with that change, then our Vue component that has our payment card input will, instead of just saying 4117, will show the Visa logo to the left of it. So when should I use it? It's basically at some point that it matters. So let's talk about quickly, if I can do Stripe checkout, might illustrate that as was just verbalized. Checkout, recurring payments, great, brand colors, Stripe, yes, JavaScript documentation. Sim. Stripe, JS example. Okay, credit or debit card. Here we go. Now we've got this. And it tells me it's a Visa because I've typed in 4117. So then I will type in the leading digits of an Amex card, which are 3727, and now it's Amex. So what's happening here? Let's pretend that it's written in Vue. We are starting to write any of the information that we need. 0225, nothing really happens over there. Something small little thing happens. I guess that's cool. I guess it's because we're on the CVC. It's asking us about that. But we type in 4117 and it knows it's a Visa. It's doing a little bit of API action. It's doing a little bit of view update. It's happening in response to an input. Cool. So let's look at actual usage of some of the other parts of Vue and what they offer. Progressive, basically it can be incremented one thing at a time. It's an ecosystem of libraries, which I think it was Caleb who pointed out, it's a little bit like Angular. It comes with a router. If we looked at React, it wouldn't have that. Any questions or comments about this Vue.js documentation, the fact that it's an ecosystem or anything of that nature? Let's have a fast discussion about that before doing programming. Okay, so Sarah Drasner and Vue Vixens, good people to learn from. So let's go to there. Sarah Drasner, award-winning speaker, VP of development at Netlify, Vue core team member. All right, that's well credentialed enough. I'd follow Sarah and Vue Vixens, vuevixens.org. Let's talk about this team here. Here we've got Jen Looper. I know Jen personally, cannot be a better, more dedicated person to programming to know. She is very involved in Microsoft at the moment, previously done other things with Google and so on. And Michelle and Vanessa and Cynthia and Christina and Teresa. And if you are getting the picture, this is a group that is promoting from the perspective of women Vue. There's no shortage at all. So chapters across the world, looks like Colombia and Nigeria and the US and Canada and Spain. So if you've got a second language and you want to talk about Vue, probably the Vue Vixens team would be cool to go to.
Wow.
All right. Any more thoughts on Vue, Vue Docs, UX? I'll ask anybody, does the Vuex pattern seem familiar to Redux? And does anybody here not know what Redux is?
So I know both, but my weakest point is the theory. I can build stuff, but I'm right now trying to pick up all the theoretical concepts for the interviews. So it really helps when you go over it.
Okay, the theory behind Redux and that bit?
No, I think I'm gonna pass on trying to explain it for now.
Well, fair enough. If you have any further comments on theory that matters to your interview process, I don't know that you'll have those questions now, but if you'd like to follow up, there's a way to do that. If you go to syracuse.io, you scroll to the bottom, there's a Slack group associated with all this. And for me, it just signs me in, I suppose, because I'm already in it. If you go to Syracuse.io and you click on this little Slack link, it'll get you into, and once you're in, there is a JavaScript channel that coalesces all this. You'd be well welcome there for any questions that follow up, Liza.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. I always have questions.
Yeah. I'm going to get into the actual code part of this Vue stuff. Okay. So what have I done? I have created an app called Fashion App, and it lives, looks like localhost 8080. Here, welcome to your Vue apps, install plugins, cool. All right, so let's go to CD code, community, fashion app, code. All right, let's go to the index file and see what we've got in our index. It's not a lot of code in there. Let's go to our app.view file. We're going to see one thing that's pretty particular to Vue. The entire component is encapsulated in a single file. This is popular or possible in Angular. You don't see it quite as the default, where you can have a single TypeScript file that has CSS and HTML and TSS, or TS, but you don't usually see it. Here, that's promoted as the default. We have a hello world view file that seems a little bit more complex. We have an app view file that seems like it has the components hello world as a part of it. And we can see in our template portion that hello world is a component that has an input called message. It says, welcome to your Vue apps. VS Code is saying that I have some recommended installationable things. So let's see. How about Vueter, which is powerful tooling? It cannot find any config file. And now that we're in it, we can see that we've got some syntax highlighting that we didn't have before. So you can get Vueter, and that might be the best way to get started with Vue in your VS Code app. It's certainly promoted as the default. Okay, welcome to your Vue.js app. This is called Fashion app, so we can call it Fashion.js. Save that. We've got a dev server that's automatically updating. That's all right. So we import this thing called hello world, and it looks like if we go to, I'm gonna zoom this in just a bit more, pardon, so it's a little bit easier to see. All right, so we have this hello world file. It looks like within the template, we've basically got HTML, not all that complicated. What we see here is that we've got a double curly braces with message inside of it. So that's probably to say that we can do little JavaScript operations on it, like add on a couple exclamation points, and then they show up. We can do some basic string interpolation stuff. Let's see if we can do something like dot length and get the length of it. Yep. So we have access to it just as it is a regular JavaScript variable in there. We can do things right inside that curly brace. Let's have a scroll down on the file. So it says that it has props, and it says that one of those props is called message, and it's of type string. So there's some strong typing that's happening here in this hello world.view. So I guess we can come up with another prop, and let's give it a list of, let's say, brands, and let's see if we can call it a string array. Maybe we had a comma and that works out. Okay, it seems like it does. And it looks like that's not quite working. Let's see what string, does that get defined anywhere? It doesn't. Can we do array of string? Yep, still no. I'm not going to type that any further, and it doesn't give me any good stuff. So what do we say here? Object? Okay, we'll call it an object and see what happens. Or maybe we can call it an array. All right, that works. Okay, so now what we've done is we've added a prop to our hello world that now takes in a message, and it takes in an array of brands. So here we have this app components. Here we have a message variable or a message input. Now we should be able to add on brands. And when we do that, it gives us this little a colon here. I'm going to defer, I think, to Caleb or Jason what this colon means.
I think it's what's in that message there, that it's a shorthand for vbind.
All right, follow up on that. What is vbind?
There we go. You got me there.
Jason?
vbind is the Vue's like two-way binding, I believe.
Okay, So interact with the view and change whatever brands is, and then the array will change like that. Okay. I'm gonna just hard code in an array here. I'll say brands are, let's say, Ralph Lauren, and another one can be Diesel. All right, so now we've got these brands arrays that are coming in, and we want to display them in a list. So how do we do that? We've got our unordered list. Anybody know how to iterate over an array in a view? It's Jason, Caleb, Liza.
Something like V4, but I don't know the specifics.
Okay, V4, that's our starting point. V4 Vue.js. List rendering, all right. So here we are in the documentation. It's solid. I think we can read this and learn something real fast. For item in items, and we're going to key on item.message. So here we're going to say V4. We're going to key on brand, and we're going to say brand in brands, and in here we do brand. All right, let's see what we got. Look at this. It's giving us one list item per character in what we put into our view here. So it's not quite what we want. We basically would like to be able to have an actual array which has 2 items in it. So inlining it didn't do what we wanted. Let's try to use an actual binding. Save that. And now we got them. So what do we learn? Not only does bind have to do with the actual ability to have data react to anything, you can basically use it to represent what's on the right-hand side in HTML as JavaScript. So it actually takes us in as an array, and without it, it takes it in as a string. I'm going to pause for Ozzy on that. Ozzy, do you follow what that's about there and what's happening?
Yeah, I'm paying attention.
All right. I'm going to ask anybody else, do they have any questions on what's happening with vbind here? Anything that you'd like to discuss or ask about? Cool. Let's move on. So we've got our brands here. Probably we're not going to be hard coding them. At some point they are going to come from a server. So let's try to get it as a variable. So let's say that we have our thing called brands here. I'll say, let's define it here. Const brands is equal to that. Doesn't quite work. Brands is assigned a value, but it's never used. Let's try brands as a part of the app. Looks like that doesn't show up there. Let's go back and see what we got here. So we've got our new view, and there they've got this data key, which is an object that then has an array on it. And so maybe that's the way we do this. Maybe we put our data Oh, I can't just wrap it like I'm used to. Okay. So let's see. We have data contains something called brands. None of this seems to be working. And it says what? It's a string object on data is deprecated. What did we miss here? I'm not sure. Any thoughts on this from the audience?
Is that view tech? Oh yeah, there we go. That's what I was wondering. The documentation.
So now we don't have the same rendering. It looks like now we say that the counter is as a result of a method call to data that returns whatever the state is. Let's give that a shot. So here's our method call. Now we want to return an object that has brands on it. Did that give us what we wanted? It did. So we got some progress here.
Okay.
So reviewing that, what we saw was that there's two different versions of Vue. There is the Vue 2 version, and there's documentation for that. And there is the Vue 3 version, and there's a documentation for that. So things changed from 2 to 3. Maybe they were good, maybe they were bad. We're using version 3. That's what we're going to keep using for the rest of this demo. All right, so we've got Fashion.js here. That's okay. We've got the bunch of stuff down here, and that's all right as well. Let's keep going in our hello world part. So probably these are two very different things that we're binding to this hello world component. Let's create some new components and call one our brands list, and then one we'll call our hero.view. So hero tends to be that thing that's like the top of your website, your big saving your click-through rate type of component. I'm going to copy all of the hello world stuff over to here. We'll remove everything from it except for the wrapping div and our message. All right, and maybe I want to keep in a little bit extra. No, that's all right. So we're gonna take the idea that this one is called a hero. I'm gonna take the idea that it takes in a message as well. And we'll leave all the style on whether we need it or not for the moment. Go back to our hello world and remove that from here. We no longer have that message in our hello world, and our brand stuff stays the same. And so now we want our hello world to have a child component, which is the hero. If we look at our app, it looks like a Vue component can take children components by saying an object. I'm going to just copy this over. We're going to go to the hello world. And that hello world gets imported inside of the file, inside of the script section of the file. So we are currently in the components, so we don't need this little router bit. Call this hero.view, call this hero.view, call this hero. What's the problem here? Define components. Hero component has been registered but not used. Let's see how the hello app gets used. We have this self-closing tag, hello world. Let's throw that in where we previously had that. We'll call this hero. We'll remove brands. What do we got? We've got Fashion.js. We've got our hero. We can change this again to be, let's say, I don't know, fashion.js. And it's updated. So what we've just done is created 3 levels of components here. So if you're paying attention, we've got our app at the top level. We've got hello world at the next level below that. And then below that, we've got hero. This is something that was pioneered in React and it's now popular across the internet, which is composable components. You can have components inside of components inside of components arbitrarily, so on and so forth. And this is a way a lot of web applications get built. Apparently that's a first party thing in Vue. So We've got this list. Let's make that a part of our brands list. Our brands list is going to go the opposite direction. So we're going to remove the message part, and we're going to remove everything else as well. We're going to call it brands list. It just has the brands prop on it. It is going to go inside of here. So we've got our import hero. We can import brands list. Paste that around. And up here now we can remove. Let's try it like this. Brands list. Self-closing. Say for what? We've got to pipe down our brands array now a different level. So this no longer has the props brand. What we have here is this data goes down a level to our hello world. And now our brands is an available variable here. With our brands list, say brands is equal to brands. We remove this here. See what we've got on our brands list side. So we say that our props brand is an array and we have the key, and that's all very similar. What do we got here? We have our brands. We have our fashion.js. So it's all good. It looks like it worked. We're going to review that for a moment and take a pause to ask anybody if they have any questions.
It's probably not an important question. I'm just curious. Peter, when I was doing my project, I just put all of the components inside the app.view. I'm just wondering if there, what the benefit would be, or if there is benefits on kind of putting them inside of another component, like putting your brands list inside of Hello World.
Yeah, there are benefits, and it depends on the actual dictates of the real application that you're building, what you do with them. So let's imagine that you've got one component that is the master for a routed page. So if this app had /brands as a route, maybe it's all that we want to do is have a page called brands.view that is routed to. That brands.view is only rendered when we're at that route. And then at that point, we want to have multiple things on the page. One of them being a brands list, one of them being something related to the different brands that exist around the world. I'm not exactly clear what we might have, a user profile, navbar, any of that. So already there, you've got your pure app view component, which is your root. And then you've got that page that's represented against a route. And then that is, in a way, a child of the app that's only accessed when you're at that route.
I see what you're saying. That makes sense. Thank you.
Let's go a little bit further in that as well. You might have a way of slotting one component inside of another. This happens sometimes when you're trying to build things that are like a card. Imagine you're building just a card for any page, like a Twitter card that shows any arbitrary data inside of this little wrapper. You might have a way of accessing that looked like card, and then you wrap your component somewhere in here. So that component renders inside of the other component using not this hard-coded style, but using slotting. It's a different concept. It achieves different effects, and it's another way that components can interoperate with each other. Let's wrap up on Vue by totally removing the Hello World component and just using a brands list and a hero. I think we can do it. Okay. So if we remove Hello World as a reference here, instead we have hero all around. We can paste that and get ourselves our brands list. We've done one bit. We know that we have to have some data, again, based on what we did previously. That's a method. And then that method has a return, and then that is our data. So we'll say something like, what are some of the brands of the world today? Oh, I suppose that Lush is one, and I suppose that Guerlain is another. So we have some data that is meant to read as brands. So let's make sure it says that. And let's see what else we have. We have our message which says fashion.js. All right, so we've got a couple of things that aren't being used. We're following our patterns from before. We have our hero first, which is our message, and the message goes inside of that. What we have that comes up after that is our brands list. And then what we get after that is our brands. If this all works out correctly, we can remove hello world. And we can actually delete it as a file. We go to our app view. We've got our references that look all right. We've got some data that passes into our hero. Our hero has the message prop. Our brands list has the brand prop, and it iterates. And there we are. So it all worked out. So we still have our title. We still have our brands listed, and we don't have any of that other stuff that was in hello world. Okay. So Spanish speaking, Ozzy, better for you to have Spanish speaking meetup?
Sí.
All right, let's get you, what is the topics that kind of kick you off? We're talking about Vue tonight, but we're gonna have another meetup next month. What other topics do you enjoy?
I'm doing right now machine learning. I've been spending most of my time on it right now. And yeah, we can do that if you can.
I don't know. I might be able to find somebody. I might be able to find somebody React in Spanish. We'll see about it.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna see that Liza's gone, and we're now. I'm gonna say between Caleb and Jason and Vivian and Ozzy, everybody. Thoughts on Vue? You want to compare it to anything you've seen before?
But actually, thank you so much for going through this. Is my version of Vue that I was working with was probably, I only got to work with part of it, so seeing the whole thing work was really helpful. I presume that it's using a runtime, so you have to include a Vue minified thing in your page where you're using it.
Yep.
Okay. So because it looks kind of like Svelte with the three different parts of the Vue, the script and the style together in one, but Svelte is compiled, right? There's no runtime for Svelte.
Yep.
I think. Okay. Yeah, it looks really cool. I'll give it another look. And then another thing I noticed is when you used the brands list, at one point you didn't capitalize the B. So it looks like it's not case sensitive when you actually use the component.
I can only imagine that it is, and that it ended up being capitalized in the actual running of it. So let's confirm that.
Okay.
Brands list, the component is capitalized. The variable names are not capitalized.
Yeah, so you had made that a lowercase, and for some reason it still worked, which surprised me. So
brands list still work. Yeah, I guess it does. Isn't that cool? So it can take snake case. Let's see if I remove that. Does that work? No, it doesn't. Okay. So it takes either the classified case, which is our capital B and our capital L, like we see here.
Right.
And it can also take snake case.
Cool.
Looks like maybe it even prefers snake case because it's giving us a little type ahead for it.
Interesting. Kind of looks like a web component in that case.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. All right, let's move right along for final thoughts from Jason.
No, it looks good. It was just kind of good. Like I only used it for a few weeks, but was able to see you access it in different ways. Like I said, putting the component inside a component. So kind of making it do things I didn't know that it could do. So that was cool to see.
Cool. Final thoughts, Vivian?
I think I'm gonna stick to checking out the new React. the double two-way binding kind of made me kind of I don't miss that. So
I think I maybe misunderstood that. So the two-way binding, I think, was just the fact that in React you still have the controlled elements, right? Peter, help me out if I'm saying something wrong, but I think in React you have those things like controlled elements, which is basically what this binding is kind of doing. But it looks like when it comes to like the actual state management with Vuex, it actually does promote the one-way data flow versus syncing up with your model.
Correct.
Cool.
Yeah, well, right on. Let's move on to RxJS. We'll not take as much more than 10 minutes on it. But before we do, let's take 5 minutes to talk about, does anybody know what RxJS is?
No.
Okay. Has anybody worked with RxJS? No. Okay. So let's imagine that we're building a front-end library and we don't want to write our own reactivity layer. RxJS could be used for that. That's what Angular did, in fact. Folks use RxJS in the world of React as well. For Syracuse area folks, our friends over at Density, they have a Redux-like state management tool where their state management is run by RxJS. So basically when the state updates, you can subscribe to it and then the application can react to that stream of data. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show a project called, I don't know what it's called, Code Projects Bod. Let's go here. What I'm going to show is not purely RxJS, but what is a concept that's possible to use anywhere. It certainly gets used in Angular. It may be nice to see in other places. And it takes the idea that RxJS is the public facing bit of a data management tool. And whatever you want to put behind that, the consumer doesn't have to get bothered by. So in this directory, there's something called facades. If anybody's got a question on what a facade is, we can talk about what we know about with the state management tools that we've spoken, NGRX or Redux or now Vuex. They have all of that theory in them of actions, of dispatches, of side effects. And some folks that just know HTML and CSS may basically only want to know, do I have data? I'd like to get that data. Just give me the data. And that's what facades promote. So I've got a facade here called programs facade. And when you look at it, it does two different bits. You see here in these two lines, days workouts observable comes from an NGRX store. This is like the Redux store. This is like the Vuex store. And this draft programs board, it comes from a service draft programs board, which is not the store. So what we have here to the consumer is just data that's available on this class. You can access any of these observables, but the facade doesn't show you where they come from. So in almost all cases, we use the actual NGRX store, except for this draft programs thing. And when I look at that, behind the scenes, it's just some observably kind of things. We have a draft programs board subject, which is a type of data structure in RxJS that you can push data into, and that's private here. But then it publicly exposes an observable that's based on that subject, and there's reasons to do it. When we add incomplete workouts, it can do things like set storage, which is onto the local storage. And then when those changes to the local storage change, then they can go into that draft programs board subject, which is then exposed as the draft programs board observable. And then ultimately it's exposed to whoever's consuming anything to do with the programs, which are, it's like a data model here. If we were building an expense app, this might be expenses, but if we were building that fashion app, this might be the brands, if we're just interacting with brands. So what we're seeing is one singular facade that, while some of it uses NGRX or that Redux-like, that Vuex-like thing to get its data, there's also a piece of it where it's coming from local storage, where it's coming from, when you look at that, there's like, if everybody's not familiar with local storage, we can't go into it, but it's a different place. But whoever's consuming it is not bothered by it. So because RxJS is a large library to learn, because there is a number of different things involved in NGRX, involved generally in state management, say you're just getting into an application development job, you're basically at the ability and level of being able to consume data. You can present things in components. As long as you've got the data, you can show it, but you can't exactly do building the entirety of the state management yourself. If you've been provided a facade, you never have to see what the state management was like ever. If you're building the facade, you never have to change the surface that that junior or that person who isn't aware of how it's all built, and you can change the back end. If at any point the draft programs board was not stored in local storage and instead it was on the NGRX store, the consumer would never know. We could change this to be store.pipe, but it would still expose the draft programs board and there would be no difference. So that's a little RxJS, also with the idea of facades built in. And I don't want to take too much more time on that. If for any other reason anybody's got more curiosity about it, we can always follow up later about it. So we're at 7 o'clock. We've got 10 remaining minutes. There is no more strictly speaking topics to cover. And we are right around the holiday season, so we can all get a little casual if we care to and just chat.
Got a couple questions on RxJS. Would you use that more on the front end or on the back end?
RxJS can be used in node environments and people do it.
Okay.
I've never done it myself.
So it's more front end then. Okay. And so you use it hand in hand with some sort of state management like Redux or something like that? Can it replace Redux or?
Yeah. So in Angular, there is Redux inspired state management, which is called NGRX. It's basically Angular reactive extensions. So there's NGRX store. It's identical in every concept to Redux, with the idea that that object is exposed as an observable. And because of that, things can react to it. So it's at the core of state management in any significant sized Angular application. But outside of that, also in Angular, the router is built on observables. You can subscribe to the query parameters, and when your query parameters change, you can get that data and react to it. Absolutely everywhere, it is a core dependency of Angular. But like our friends over at Density, they use a React app and they just want a little piece of RxJS in there. And so they just have a little piece of it. So it can be used a lot more in a lightweight way. If you don't want to use your whole thing as observable, you can sort of augment Redux like they did.
Okay, interesting. And so you use Angular for most things. I've heard because if you're using RxJS, you're doing reactive programming. How does that work with object-oriented versus a functional approach?
Well, it doesn't really fit cleanly into either, because you have this sense that you have data streams that you're working with. Functional might be, I don't know, it's all right. Functional would promote not having classes. I've never seen functional RxJS, but I can imagine it would be done. I don't know whether Vivian's got any thoughts on that. She might. I don't know whether Jason has any thoughts. He might.
Okay.
I don't know. Well, first, let's go back to that question you were mentioning about RxJS with React, right? I think most of the time, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, Redux doesn't use React doesn't use observables. So I'm more curious as to how Density uses RxJS with React. At least that's like my surface Google situation. As for functional and programming and object-oriented programming, like I don't know. So with functional programming, you still need some form to store data, right? And with functional programming, like, you can't really be purely functional, if I remember. Like, it's all about using functions, right? And you just have one input and one output, right? And so I think what I'm trying to say here is the idea of functional programming can be applied to code, but then you still need some form of state storage, which is what Redux is for. So yeah, kind of.
Yeah. I think
what I'm trying to say here.
that's a good observation. In terms of your first question there, React is only the view part. So this would be the other parts of the data that you could use RxJS with. I'm more familiar with functional programming than with object-oriented. There's a lot more than just using functions, because we use functions in everything we do, but it's more about maintaining purity, like you were saying, right? So there are ways to maintain purity even though you're doing state management. In fact, Redux or libraries like that, like NGRX, actually use a functional paradigm, because what they do is, instead of mutating their data in their store, they give you a different copy of the state every time. So they're not actually mutating things, at least not how Redux is doing things. So that's the reason why I asked that question. Was I've heard, whenever I've researched reactive programming, it tends to go hand in hand with functional. So it's just kind of curious. I've never actually seen it with object-oriented. So, but apparently it's being used in Angular more. It's like the default with the object-oriented style.
So I think that to the degree you can use the object-oriented classes in Angular without ever using getters and setters, and instead using observables that you subscribe to and behavior subjects that you push to, you can come out with something that's more close to the intention of the Angular framework. So in some sense, the object-orientedness of it is it's a little bit like JavaScript in a lot of ways, where you can do what you want with it, object-oriented or functional. As much as you can, when you can lean towards reactive, you'll have a more predictable application. And I know that's a big part of functional, that pure mutation bit, predictable, and all of the benefits of functional. I've seen better applications in Angular when they've leaned in that direction.
What would be some of your resources in getting started with reactive programming? How did you get started with that?
If I can find the video on it, and I won't try now. There was a YouTube video that I once watched where a fella wrote a basic package of observables from the ground up in the course of the 1 hour talk. It wasn't the exact RxJS package with all of its operators, but he created what was an observable, and that gave me a theoretical grounding in it. Then from there, it's been force of business cases. I had a number of clients come at me and ask me about Angular. And while it started in AngularJS, I said, sure. At a certain point, they went to Angular 2, which entirely became reactive. And then by repeatedly writing applications object-oriented from the start, I would incorporate a little bit of reactivity and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. The whole shift comes from the idea that you've got to transmit data as a stream. You're not just setting data and then setting it again and then setting it again. You're setting stream to either be subscribed to or to be outputting in different ways. So additional resources that are good are basically, you can do very well in the Angular world because the educational stuff around it is all with observables built in.
Hmm.
There's a lot in the idea of picking your framework of choice. So you might not actually have a real need for Angular on the other side of it. Just by looking at that framework from a educational standpoint, you could learn a lot about observables. You learn how they use their router, how you can subscribe to query params. You can learn how, like, that facade concept is very Angular specific. You can learn a little bit about behavior subjects and the other types of subjects that are part of the RxJS package. You can go to any number of talks on RxJS operators that are used in the context of Angular by going to ngconf YouTube, which is where top Angular speakers talk. So it was,
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, and that's from my experience. I know that there's other reactive packages out there as well that have nothing to do with RxJS, but are also very reactive. Svelte being kind of like that in some cool ways. Last minute, everybody. I'm glad to have had everybody who showed up and for all those who remained all the way through it. We are recording this. We'll send out the whole thing on YouTube pretty fast, and then we'll probably cut out just the view part and put that out for everybody in public.
Oh, man. Thanks for doing this, Peter. This was great.
Jason, always glad to have you on it when you're here. Have a happy Christmas.
Hey, thanks. You too, man. And Caleb, I want to thank you. Caleb helped me with my Vue project a little bit. So it's good to see you, man.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully I didn't veer you off in the wrong direction.
No, I got
Really, I didn't know as much as I should have. So.
No, I got a second interview tomorrow. So it seemed to,
Awesome.
we'll see. I'm hopeful.
Glad to hear it.
Ozzy, Vivian, glad to have you on tonight.
Thanks for including me.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Okay, everybody, until next time, happy JavaScripting.
See you guys.